Welcome back to the Herbalist Hour. Today's really going to be more of a mushroom hour, I suppose. We're welcoming Lee Carroll to the show. Welcome to the show, Lee.
Thanks, Mason. It's my pleasure to be here.
Welcome to the Herbalist Hour. This is where community gather, merging the power of people and flowers, the sweet and the bitter to the salty, the sour. Umami, it's time for the Herbalist Hour.
Yeah, I'm excited to meet you. We've never had a conversation before, so I'm really stoked to talk about medicinal mushrooms, or as I think you might call them, functional mushrooms, and we could maybe talk about maybe the difference in terminology there. But before we get to that, why don't we get to know Lee a little bit more? Lee, what brought you to the world of medicinal mushrooms, and as well as I know you're an herbalist as well. What brought you to this whole world?
Yeah, well, that is a good place to start, and it's a long answer, so I'll keep it brief. Back in 1990, I got the chance to be production manager at a small company called MediHerb, based in Queensland in Australia, and they had big plans and big ambitions. I worked with them for 30 years, and they're now like a real significant force, in practitioner-only herbal medicine. So after about 30 years, it was time to move on, and I got the chance to work with a few small companies and to develop some products. And during my time with MediHerb, they only ever had one mushroom product, so I didn't really kind of get my head around mushrooms, teaching them to practitioners. And even when I did my formal education, in Australia, being a herbalist is a Bachelor of Health Science. 3 years I majored in Western herbal medicine. I didn't learn anything about mushrooms during that time. And Kerry Bone, who's the founder of MediHerb, is still a dear friend. We're actually writing a textbook on medicinal mushrooms together at the moment. And I didn't want to be competing with him in the herbal space, and mushrooms emerged as this, really fascinating area that I knew nothing about. I studied mycology a little bit in my first degree when I was a young man, back when I was in my, late teens, early 20s. So mushrooms catered for my curiosity, my interest in extending my knowledge, tapping into what was, like at the time, back in 2020 when I first started, a really interesting and emerging area and space, within the healthcare sector. So it just kind of blossomed from there. And, now I've got an online course. I'm the chief medical herbalist at Real Mushrooms, and pretty much, all of my, daily, working hours are devoted to mushrooms. And I'm loving it. And in honor of the thing, I bought a new T-shirt. Got the
So I was just going to compliment you on that's an awesome T-shirt.
Got the theme going. Yes, yeah, so that's the kind of the speeded up version.
Sure. Well, you mentioned you're working at a company called Real Mushrooms. I'd like to hear more about this company. What do you all sell? By the way, dear listener, this is not a sponsored episode. I just seemed really interested in Lee's work. So just to get that out of the way, but why don't you tell us about Real Mushrooms, the company, and I'd love to hear more about your role there and what you do in your day-to-day operations.
Sure. Well, in my 30-year herbal medicine career, quality, was the key thing. And I was drilled, very thoroughly in what quality means, understanding the testing methods and developing the quality standards. When I first started, HPLC and GC and mass spec and all of these things that we take for granted now, like in the herbal industry, weren't available. So it was all kind of organoleptic. I learned how to taste and smell 165, different, medicinal plants, and, assess their quality based on that. So when I was looking to do contract work with various companies, the hurdle that they all had to meet at the very first, kind of discussion point was not how much money are you going to pay me. It's like, what's the quality philosophy of your business? Like, what's the back end look like? How do you source? What tests do you do? How committed are you to, advancing the cause? Like, do you have the strength of conviction to change things? Because that's what the science says. Even though it might not be, perfect from a marketing point of view. So I worked with a couple of companies, and Real Mushrooms really stood out as ticking all of those boxes, and they do put quality first. And their parent company, Namex, has been making mushroom extracts for more than 20 years, nearly 30 years, and they've been a guiding influence in China in the development of organic growing standards, and they're now at the forefront of developing the testing methods that will help industry ensure that quality mushroom extracts are being used in products. So, and it's kind of rare to meet a company that really ticks all the boxes in terms of looking after staff, being genuinely committed to improving quality in every area of the business. And it's Real Mushrooms, a relatively young company. It's seen some stellar growth. They're in a significant growth phase at the moment. And I'm 65 at the moment. And, some of the businesses that I worked in, age was seen as a problem rather than a benefit, They wanted to get, younger blood, so to speak. So Real Mushrooms recognized that I had all of this, like knowledge built up over, all of those years, and they're really keen to tap into it. So I'm thriving there. I've been there a year now. And my title of Chief Medical Herbalist doesn't really say much of what I do. But Real Mushrooms gives practitioners a 40% discount on the products that get sold to the public.
Wow.
So I'm involved in doing practitioner education. So we have monthly fungi forums where we talk about how mushrooms get used clinically. I write blogs. I do seminars. I did a tour in October last year. I spoke at a couple of conferences. I spoke at a veterinary conference. I did a seminar in Berkeley. And so that's that side of the business, but I'm also in the like direct to consumer business as well. And in that role, I'm kind of like a brand ambassador where, my life history and my interest in mushrooms kind of shines through in terms of social media and the marketing of the products. I write blogs. I do Facebook Lives where, the public can ask me any questions about, how mushrooms fit into the health world. And there's a rapidly developing product line at the moment. So Real Mushrooms has got some fantastic veterinary products. So they're focused on that at the moment. But when that veterinary product development process kind of naturally concludes, I'll get the chance to develop some mushroom products and with combining mushrooms with herbs. And then it's unusual in the modern world for a company. Influencers don't always have to be trained in what they're influencing in. They just have to look good on camera and say the right thing. So, I've been practicing as a herbalist, in a clinical setting for more than 13 years now. I've got 35 years industry experience. So to have me develop a product based on all of that experience. And when I was living in the US and even after those years, I've had 20 years experience teaching healthcare professionals, predominantly chiropractors, but also, the full gamut of healthcare professionals, how to integrate Western herbal medicine into their clinic. So bringing that wealth of experience into the product development area and then being able to write the material, and then be part of the marketing and the selling and the education. I'm really excited by that. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds like you wear a lot of hats. Just a quick break from the show to let you know about our Herbalism freebies. So if you'd like to get a bunch of ebooks, herbal community discounts, videos, audio lessons, all the above and more, you could go to herbalist.com, and at the top of the navigation menu, you're going to see a button that says freebies. So when you fill out that form, you're going to be signing up for our email newsletter, and in exchange, you're going to get a ton of Herbalism freebies. And you're going to love the email newsletter because it updates you on Herbalism events, new YouTube videos, etc. So I know you're going to love it. So thank you so much. And now back to the show. You were talking about the quality side of real mushrooms. And by the way, dear listener, it's realmushrooms.com, correct, Lee?
Yeah, realmushrooms.com.
Awesome. Realmushrooms.com. You were talking about the quality. So I was hoping you could speak a little bit about what's being offered on the market through, say, other brands, and then kind of just teach the audience what to look for in a quality mushroom product, because I know that's really big for real mushrooms.
Yeah, good place to start, Mason. And your audience are all well schooled,
Sure.
in the herbal kind of language and understanding the nuances of plants. And when you look at a plant, there's lots of plant parts that can be medicinal.
Mm-hmm.
And as we were saying earlier, hopefully people don't get confused between dandelion roots and dandelion leaves.
Right.
I mean, at the
Hopefully.
silly end of that spectrum, the unwary consumer, like if you're trying to sell them apples, what if you tried to sell them leaves of apple trees?
Right.
They're very different parts, and they give very different nutritional profiles. And from a medicine point of view, every part of the plant's got its own unique role to play. So when you're thinking about a fungus, and that's the correct term for the singular, and fungi is the correct term for the plural. So the kingdom Plantae's got plants, the kingdom Animalia's got animals, the kingdom Fungi's got fungi in it. And there's a lot of deliberate confusion being made around that, and the average consumer thinks of a fungus just as a mushroom. But the life cycle of a fungus is the ones that we use, in this context as a medicinal mushroom or a functional mushroom, is quite simple. And the organism that we call a fungus, you rarely see it because it's embedded in the substrate that it's digesting as its food and using as its home. So it might be a dead log, it might be the soil. In the case of cordyceps, it might be various types of insects. And everybody is familiar with the crazy world of that. So you've got mycelium, which is the main body of the organism. When we draw analogies, you'd call it the vegetative part. So that's the main deal in terms of a fungus, and its role is to seek out food, to survive in the environment, and then when conditions are right, to produce a reproductive structure that we call a mushroom. Technically it's a sporocarp because it produces spores, but the fungal world is really curious. There's all different ways that they do that. So there's lots of different kind of technical terms to describe the different ones. But in the common language, we dumb it down as just a mushroom. And then that mushroom creates spores, and then those spores get in the soil and they germinate, and then they create more mycelium. So in terms of using the fungal parts in a medicinal sense, the mushroom is very different to the mycelium, and that's very different to the spores. So what Real Mushroom sells is the mushroom, and the mushroom from an evolutionary point of view, the reproductive structure of a mushroom has to support the survival instincts of the organism and survive in the environment where it's kind of, naturally evolved. So that means that those mushrooms, if they're tasty, like they want to have that's a tendency I have, it's because it's phyto or myco. So there's this mycochemistry in a mushroom that might inhibit herbivore grazing. It might inhibit other fungi attacking it. It might inhibit nematodes, or it might help with staying moist so it can deliver its spores, over a longer period of time, or it might prevent UV light. So when we consume a mushroom, where there's beta glucans, which we can talk about, but there's also secondary metabolites, and that those mycochemical profiles can be analyzed, and then you can match that up with the efficacy and the physiological action of those mushrooms in the human body, like the bitter molecules in reishi. What they do to animal cells when they come in contact with them is, to a large part, quite well understood. And so if you don't have those bitter molecules, then you don't get the benefit of reishi. So real mushrooms is all about the mushroom. But modern scientists come along with their reductionist thinking and say, well, what is it about a mushroom that is the magic bullet? Like, could we put our finger on one thing and make that a drug? So that began happening in the 60s. So scientists focused on the mycelium. Mushrooms are complicated to grow and they're more expensive to grow. So scientists said, what if we put that mycelium in a tank of liquid and then grew it really quickly? We could get that mycelium out, then we could extract the beta glucans, we could purify them, we could tinker with them chemically to make them more biologically active, and we could have these great drugs. So that's a way of kind of advancing the tradition in a scientific kind of sense. And there's a lot of products that in China and Japan that have got patents, and they're well understood and well known. They're less available commercially, and when they are, they're quite expensive. So they're the two lines of kind of relevant scientific and traditional knowledge that guide the use of mushrooms. Spores get produced en masse by mushrooms like reishi, and there is some emerging evidence that spores might have some very highly specific uses. But because reishi makes so many spores, it's kind of like a waste. And the commercial mind says, let's not waste that. Maybe there's something medicinal in it. So there's not any tradition around it, but let's make it tradition. So there isn't anything that the spores do that the mushroom doesn't do. And in terms of quality, if you let a mushroom sporulate until it kind of exhausts itself, like you get kilograms of spores, but you get a reishi mushroom which is diluted of its vitality and its chemistry is no longer as good as when you order harvest it, in terms of the tradition, which would be, a lot earlier in its life cycle. And then you've got this modern thing that's happened where people have come along and said, what if we inoculate brown rice or sorghum or oats with mycelium and let it grow in a bag? So it doesn't produce a mushroom, or if it does, it produces very few. And then we dry that and then we sell it as if it's a mushroom. So that's an extension of the tradition that hasn't been proven. And if we take our traditions in directions that aren't scientifically validated, then we're in danger of damaging that tradition, and the people that partake in that new version of that tradition can become disillusioned. So there's a lot of products on the market at the moment that are made with this mycelium fermented grain technique. And when you look at the chemistry, there's none of the chemistry in those products matches the mushroom. And the chemistry that can be found is significantly less than what you would get in a mushroom. So if those products work, and that's yet to be proven, there's very little human evidence to prove that those products work, then if there's got to be some rationale for how they work. And the companies that sell these products, they've been doing it for more than 15 years. There hasn't been any molecules identified in any therapeutically relevant concentration that would drive any therapeutic effect at the doses that they recommend. So one of the more famous products on the market is a type of turkey tail. And there is some human evidence to show that 6 to 9 grams turned the dial on some particular immune cells. But that company sells those products and only recommends you take 1 gram. So, if that was an honest way of representing your science, you'd say on the label, the little bit of research we have done says that you should take 9 grams. So these products are really cheap to make, and unfortunately, their sales is greater now, I think, than just pure mushroom extracts. So we're in this unusual position of our tradition, and I don't really distinguish herbal medicine from fungal medicine. The word herbal medicine is quite ancient, in terms of its usage. It goes back quite a long way. And fungi were only realized to be a different kingdom of life in the 60s. So, what's problematic with our Western herbal medicine tradition is that we didn't get on board with the use of mushrooms as much as the Chinese and Japanese tradition. So it's less well represented. So that's a long answer to a really important question. And I think the population on large is being tricked by slick marketing campaigns to buy these mycelium fermented grains, when they think they're getting a mushroom product. And Real Mushrooms is very dedicated to validating the tradition from which those mushrooms come. And humans have been using reishi, for 4,000 or 5,000 years in terms of documented use, probably a lot longer than that. We can talk about the human history of mushroom consumption. I think humans have always consumed mushrooms.
Yeah, no, it's heartening to see that mushrooms and consuming mushrooms, medicinal mushrooms, has grown in popularity, especially amongst like our cohort of like herbal type people. But it does seem to be growing in popularity. Lots of new companies coming along. As far as Real Mushrooms and your products go, I was looking at your website and I see that you sell like these mushroom extract powders. I've always been curious about this. Can you tell us the difference between, say, like an alcohol mushroom double extraction versus, say, mushroom extract powders? Like, is there a difference in efficacy? Do you sell alcoholic extracts, the double extracts, or not? I would just like to know the reason for that and perhaps the efficacy and the differences between the two.
Yeah, good question. And as a herbalist, most of what I give my patients is a liquid extract. So you can see those bottles on the shelf.
Sure.
That's one row of 4 rows, of what's visible. I've got like 100 different liquid extracts on my shelf, and every patient I see, I give a liquid medicine. I've experimented in the past with liquid mushroom extracts and not found them to be as efficacious. So I stick now with the powders, and I'd come to that conclusion before I'd actually met Real Mushrooms. So the difference and the techniques. So and a mushroom and a plant are not the same type of entity. So with a plant, if you're making a liquid extract, the idea of making that liquid extract is to isolate the chemistry that you're after, and you choose the alcohol to target that chemistry. So, like with ginger, the active constituents are very oily and resinous, and 90% ethanol does the best job of getting those things out. If you want the water-soluble components, that's a different, take on the tradition. So if you're wanting to do that properly, and then you throw away the fibrous material that's not considered to be valuable. With a mushroom, you can target the chemistry with the solvent like water or ethanol, but the mushroom itself, the insoluble part, retains significantly high levels of activity. So throwing it away is not in the best interests of the therapy for the patient. So we can come up with a scheme which has different strengths of extracts to perform different tasks. So with a mushroom, the traditional technique is boiling them in water, and you need to finely grind the mushroom to about 150 microns in I think it's 150 mesh screen to get a very small particle size, and then you boil it in water for between 2 and 3 hours. And you need to boil it to get as much of the soluble beta-glucan out of the cell wall of the fungus. The cell wall of the fungus holds the beta-glucans and those related molecules. There's some non-starch alpha-glucans as well, and they're kind of embedded in a matrix of chitin as well. So boiling in water for 2 hours gives a product which matches the tradition. And then some mushrooms have got secondary metabolites like reishi, which aren't 100% or fully soluble in water. So if you make a water decoction of reishi, you can taste the bitterness. You're getting a lot of the ganoderic acids out, but not 100% of them. So companies will finish off with an ethanol extract to ensure that all of the all of the triterpenes get extracted. So there's a combination of water extracts, and then there's the dual extracts where you do water first and then ethanol second. So addressing the difference between dry and liquid extracts then. So when you make a liquid extract, the finished product is very typically going to be more dilute than the starting material. So if you've got, 1 pound, and I think in metric, so if I do it in pounds and ounces, your audience will appreciate it better. But if I've got a pound of herb and I do a percolation and I get 2 pounds of extract or 32 ounces of extract, we call that a 1-in-2 extract. If I got 16 ounces out, I'd call it a 1-in-1 extract. So you've dissolved theoretically all of the chemistry from that plant into that liquid, and you've got a faithful representation of the chemistry. And I firmly believe that the energetics of a plant come from the chemistry. So you're authentically matching up the energetics as well when you do that. But if you want to dose, then if you want 1 gram of the plant, you have to use 2 mils of the liquid extract. Or if you need to use 10 grams of the plant, you've got to have 20 mils. So the liquid product is almost always weaker. And that means that with a product that is a relatively high dose, you're using lots of liquid, like in the formula. When you make a dried extract, so just going back to what I was saying earlier, you boil the extract for 2 hours. Mm-hmm. Then if you can remove the water and dry that, you've got effectively a 1-to-1 extract, which is the original mushroom fully dried, but rendered more biologically active because you've ground it up and you've extracted all the good stuff. And in that, if you don't throw anything away, you have a 1-to-1, and the insoluble part of the mushroom acts as a prebiotic, and it has a unique influence over the microbiota in the large intestine, and the particles can be broken up by those bacteria, and then they can interact with some of the immune receptors that get expressed on the lining of the gut. So Real Mushrooms has got this special technology around making these 1-to-1 extracts, and then you can just so if you use reishi as an example, like 3 or 4 grams a day as a whole mushroom is a really good dose. With lion's mane, 1 gram a day is the low end of the dose. Clinical trials are around 4 grams a day, so you can regulate the dose in that way. And then in clinic, I actually add the powdered extracts into my finished liquid formulas, and then so the patient doesn't have to do 2 separate things.
Right.
And so that describes the 1-in-1 process. And then some of the extracts are concentrates. So you can boil it for 2 hours, and then you can filter it through a sieve, and then you can throw away the mark, we call it. And then you've got all of the soluble stuff, and then you can concentrate that and dry it. So then you can get concentrates that are 16-to-1 or 10-to-1 or 8-to-1. And then those then can be put into capsules or kept as powders, and then they're significantly stronger than the starting material. And if you look at the retail world of mushroom extracts, they're typically 1-in-4 extracts. So 1 pound of mushroom has made 4 pounds. That's 64 ounces of an extract. So if you're wanting to get 1 gram of mushroom, you need 4 milliliters of liquid, and that makes it more expensive for the patient, and it means they have to be taking more stuff, to get that therapeutic dose. So Have I helped or have I made
No,
it?
that was very thorough and in depth. No, I appreciate that. You mentioned earlier, like the importance. You kind of brushed by it, the importance of the bitterness in the reishi, and I know that's something that we definitely wanted to talk about. So I'm curious. So the real mushrooms reishi extracted powder, when you're tasting it or when you're consuming it, are you tasting that bitterness? First of all, just curious, is it strong and intense bitterness? And second of all, can you kind of go into why the bitterness from the reishi mushroom is so important? And I'm guessing a lot of these other, I've had a lot of different mushroom products and mushrooms over the years, but reishi does kind of stand out as being this hyper bitter flavor. I can't really think of too many other super bitter mushrooms, but yeah. So bitterness in your mushroom powder extract, and then please explain the importance of the bitterness in the reishi.
Yeah, well, bitterness is a quality test that every consumer can apply, and just like echinacea in the herbal world, if echinacea doesn't make your mouth tingle as a result of the alkylamides that are present, then it can't be good echinacea, because those molecules interact with CB1 and CB2 receptors in unique ways to bring about immune, health. So it's the same with reishi. If you taste your reishi and it's not bitter, it's not like whack you in the face, make you cry like a baby bitter,
Right.
then it's not authentic. And authentic reishi should make you pull like the worst face. You'd be like, my God, I cannot drink that. And then give me a capsule, please, because I never want to have that experience again. And the real mushrooms reishi is an 8-to-1 extract. So every gram is worth 8 grams of dried mushroom.
Wow.
So it's very strong in terms of that discussion that we were just having. And 1 gram a day puts you into like the therapeutic dosage category in my schema of how I would dose reishi. And reishi is not called the mushroom of immortality for nothing. And it's a lifestyle thing, just like exercise. You can't exercise, 1 week out of a month or 1 month out of a year. You got to do a little bit regularly. It's what keeps you healthy. So little bits of reishi on a regular basis, ideally little bits every day, support the weaknesses in our physiology that can guarantee us a long and healthy life. When you combine it with all sorts of other strategies, then you could have a longer health span, so you'd have less disease and you'd live a little bit longer, and your period of morbidity would be short. So my idea would be, maybe I could be sick for a day and then, when I'm 95, die,
Yeah, sure.
That would be kind of like the ideal,
It's ideal.
kind of equation. So in terms of the bitterness, and I'm a bit of an expert in this, I've been lecturing on it for many years now. As old school herbalists, and I put myself in that category, I was taught that, you had to taste the bitterness to, get the benefit of the upper digestive tract function. So bitterness is a missing taste in the overall schema of, having balanced tastes, and we would be healthier if we had more bitterness. Well, around 2010, the science around bitterness really started to take off. And bitter receptors have been found absolutely everywhere in the body. And the scientific investigation of what those bitter receptors do is fully complete. But what we do know is that bitter receptors are significantly expressed in the gastrointestinal tract, and those digestive bitters that we're all familiar with, like gentian and dandelion root. There's a long list of them. Globe artichoke, andrographis is in that category. That there's the ability for our digestive tract to sense that bitterness through bitter receptors. And humans have got 25 active bitter receptors. They're denoted as TAS2R with a number. So taste 2R is the bitter, and then there's a number that denotes which receptor it is. So the phytochemistry interacts with various bitter receptors to pull the levers on different physiological actions and functions. So those bitter receptors are expressed everywhere in the body. So the immune system has got them. So a bitter herb like wormwood, one of the ways that it works is by interacting with the bitter receptors on immune cells to create an anti-inflammatory response, for example. They're found in the kidney, they're found in the lungs, and in the lungs, they relax airways. In the sinuses, they speed up the frequency and the beat of the cilia that move the mucus around and increase the production of nitric oxide to kill any bugs. So a classic bitter herb like golden seal, exerts its influence in part by that kind of mechanism. So when you look at the bitterness in reishi, and I'm hypothesizing here because no one's ever done this research. If anybody wants to do a PhD, this would be like the ideal topic, I reckon. And this is where we get guided by our traditions, right? So, what people were doing, 100, 200, 1,000, 2,000, 4,000 years ago, there's a lot of wisdom in that. It's not always right. Sometimes it's wrong, but we need to take what they've done and then look at it through the modern lens of how we can through science. And when you look at the cardiovascular system, and reishi is a key cardiovascular mushroom. That's a significant part of its traditional use. And there's a lot of research to suggest that the beta glucans have a particular influence around, cardiac tissue. But the bitterness in reishi, when you look at the heart in particular, 21 of the 25 bitter receptors that our body has are expressed in the heart and the vasculature. And they're there for a reason. We just don't know what that reason is. So in the heart, bitter receptor number 14 in the left ventricle is expressed as highly as some of the adrenergic receptors which control heart rate. So why would they be there in such huge volumes if they weren't doing something? So it's my theory that in part, the way that reishi exerts its influence is via those bitter triterpenes, getting at those receptors and modifying heart function. And it's likely to be a very subtle thing. And just like I use that exercise analogy, when you tickle those receptors on a regular basis over the course of your lifespan, it just kind of helps support them. If we're to look at the endothelial cells that line the entire cardiovascular system, they change their kind of morphology a bit when you get into the heart, but they still play, crucial roles. The triterpenes get into the endothelial cells and they get involved in regulating the stress responses of those endothelial cells. So the endothelial cells that have to support the body against all of the crazy shit that we do, like we don't exercise, we have high salt, we eat a lot of sugar, we've got a lot of, fats in our blood, from dietary sources. That's all insulting to the linings of our vascular system, and that's where much of our atherosclerotic and cardiovascular disease comes from. So there's lots of chemicals, lots of phytochemicals, that we know about, resveratrol and the epigallocattic and gallate from green tea, and the various oligomers from hawthorn berries and hawthorn leaves that all have similar kind of roles and functions. Arjuna does the same thing. That the chemistry elements from the natural world get into these endothelial cells and help protect them against the stresses and strains of modern life. And when you do it regularly, you get less cardiovascular disease as a result of having healthier endothelial cells. And there's been some very elegant studies done with laboratory animals to back that stuff up. So if your reishi's not bitter, it's no good. And that fermented, the mycelium fermented grain that we were talking about earlier, the mycelium doesn't need the bitter triterpenes because they're in the mushroom as a survival mechanism to make that mushroom, last longer and deliver more spores. The mycelium doesn't need that. So there's no triterpenes in the mycelium. So using the mycelium for that purpose is just plain stupid, and the companies that sell those products aren't honoring the tradition. And if you taste those products, there's absolutely no hint of bitterness. So, and I like to, every patient that I have, I get them to taste what I'm giving them, and I give them instruction around what those tastes are doing. And bitterness is always the most fun, in terms, because everybody's got a weakness in that area. And the sensation of bitterness is to protect infants from accidentally poisoning themselves in the absence of a parent being around, or a tribe being around. So as we get older, those bitter receptors get pruned so that they're less active as we become more educated about what we can and can't eat. And then it's the job of the parents in a traditional framework to educate the children that bitterness is not problematic, and we need to leave that infantile behavior behind and relax into the fact that bitterness is good for us. And when you consume bitter herbs and bitter foods on a regular basis, the taste buds get tuned to receiving them. So the whack you in the face, make you cry, make you full the worst face, that behavior lessens, and then you can kind of relax into the full benefits of it. And that's why I like to drink reishi tea rather than take a capsule, because I think, medicinally, I don't think there's any difference, but it trains your brain. It's a bit like doing cold plunging, like people hate to do that, but they still do it. That whack you in the face bitterness, it's kind of like a shock to the vagus nerve, which I think helps to keep it kind of toned up.
Yeah, I've always kind of compared it to like getting used to spicy foods. Now that I've been consuming...
it's very similar. Yeah.
Similar, right? Yeah, and over the course of years, I've consumed a lot of gnarly tasting herbal products that are very bitter, and now I've kind of grown to like it, and I've actually been able to like differentiate like underlying different flavors beneath all that bitterness. Like gentian to me has a really actually beautiful, delicate flavor underneath all of that bitterness. So yeah, I think you're right. We probably have a bitterness deficiency in at least Western civilization. So
we totally do. Yeah.
And I love that you encourage your clients to taste the herb. Very good for them. So man, I love that hypothesis that you have too. And dear listener, if you're seeking your PhD, definitely give that a go for what Lee suggested. But yeah, that was really fascinating. I've never heard it put quite like that. So cardiovascular benefits via reishi. I know you're also an expert in lion's mane, which is heavily associated with the cognitive function. And actually, upstairs right now, I'm making I'm beginning to make the lion's mane double extract, alcoholic extract. So I'm really excited to bring that back into my self-care routine. First of all, I have to say, I won't name the product or the brand, but I remember, because I've taken countless alcoholic double extracts, and I would just take it, tonically. And I never really felt like, I'm sure it was doing something to my chemistry, to my brain, etc. But I remember taking a powdered extract and like having it in, say, a coffee or something like that. And it really was like whoosh. Like I don't want to say I felt high from it, but I definitely felt like, oh my goodness, this is so effective. So why don't you chat a little bit about maybe the benefits of lion mane, wherever you kind of want to go with your passion for this mushroom, but also maybe if you have any opinions on, say, taking the double extract versus the mushroom powder again.
Sure. Yeah. Well, favorite topic of mine. We need to be guided by the tradition, and we need to not stray too far from that tradition unless the science tells us that we should stray, away from the tradition. So when we go back to the earliest clinical trials, the effective way of taking lion's mane was a whole powder of the mushroom consumed either in a cookie or as a soup, as a food. And the doses that were effective were in the 3 to 4 to 5 gram a day category. So that sets the scene for, a modern, person. So that research, back in the 70s, 80s. So that's a fair amount of time ago. So we need to be guided by that when we develop modern products. So what is it about lion's mane that makes it effective? The reductionist mindset, which is rife in our industry, says it's the secondary metabolites, that it's the arenacenes in the mycelium, and there's animal studies, there's a human clinical trial that backs that up. So let's go for gold on arenacine A, and let's reinvent lion's mane around that. And I don't disagree with that, but what I would say is that if we're honouring our tradition, you would take the Ergothioneine A from the mycelium and you would add it back to a whole mushroom extract. So you'd have a combination of the two. Just like you're doing a double extract, you'd do a double preparation. You'd use the mushroom and the mycelium and combine them together. I have studied this in depth, and I'm still very old school. Even though I've got a scientific framework in terms of how I like to understand these things, I fully appreciate and embrace the tradition and these very challenging concepts of synergy that are really hard to explore scientifically. So what's going on with lion's mane, I think, is threefold. So you've got insoluble beta-glucans, and they're very complex in lion's mane, and we don't know much at all about how they get metabolized by bacteria in our gut. But what we do know is that the short-chain fatty acids, and then there's a whole lot of volatile organic molecules that aren't well understood. This gut-brain axis that is common in our lexicon now, that at least the short-chain fatty acids have been proven to influence brain behavior. There's fatty acid receptors in our brain. They get through the blood-brain barrier. So a big part of how lion's mane exerts its influence is via that gut-brain axis. And that matches with the tradition because that's how they did it. Then the next thing is that lion's mane is very high in a naturally occurring molecule in mushrooms called ergothioneine. And ergothioneine is heralded as an antioxidant, but it's much more than that. It's kind of like a cell regulator of energy metabolism, of mitochondrial function. And ergothioneine plays a very, very important role in neurological health. And there's significant associations between low plasma levels of ergothioneine across the course of a person's life and the development of all of the neurodegenerative diseases, like at the most benign, mild cognitive impairment, or there's new lingo that gets used to describe this stuff, but Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and all of the variations. So ergothioneines are not yet well kind of understood or thought about, but that's a big part of how lion's mane works. And scientists suggest that you need about 3 or 4 milligrams a day to top up what you get from your natural diet to give you a baseline level of ergothioneine. I'm recommending people take 10 milligrams, based on my understanding of the research. So there's 2 things about lion's mane that make it work. And then the third thing, from the fruiting body point of view or the mushroom point of view, is the hericinones. And the hericinones are secondary metabolites that you're getting access to through your ethanol part of your extraction. And they influence various receptors in the brain, and you get a synergy between those 3 things, which improves neurological function. Lion's mane is very underrated as an immune herb as well. So there might be some immune involvement, calming down the immune system. There might be some glial cell action, as a result of that immune function. So the very best mushroom extracts, and lion's mane from real mushrooms is a 1-to-1 extract, where it's the whole mushroom, it's been ground, it's been boiled, double extracted, and then all of the solvents being removed, the water of the ethanol, and then put back together. So you've got a whole mushroom that has not lost anything. It's entirely the same as the original mushroom, but it's in an activated form. And then we have the mycelium. So as going on with what I said earlier, the scientists come along, they grow the mycelium, and then they get the extract of that, and then they put that in a clinical trial. So 5 milligrams of Ergothioneine A had significant benefits in people with Alzheimer's disease, which makes it a really strong target. But to get 5 milligrams of Ergothioneine, you need 48 grams of mycelium. So companies that do the mycelium fermented grains are saying, our product's mycelium, so therefore there'll be Ergothioneine A in it. And if you take our product, you'll get those benefits. But if you do the math, and I have done the math, and I've looked at the patents that these companies have developed, and within the fermented mycelium grain, the grain fermented mycelium fermented grain, there's only about 10% of that finished product is mycelium. So if you've got 1,000 milligrams as 2 capsules, then you've got about 97 milligrams of mycelium. So if you want to get erinacine A from that mycelium, you need 48 grams of it. So you need thousands of capsules,
Right.
to get the right level of erinacine A. So it's just basically it's a scam.
Right.
But I am in full favor of getting the liquid culture mycelium, extracting it for the erinacine A, and then ideally mixing it back into that 1-in-1 extract, or an 8-to-1, which still embodies all of these the soluble beta glucans. But that would be the pinnacle of the combination of tradition and modern science, and would give the public the best opportunity to derive the full benefits from lion's mane. And I am totally dismayed by how, I shouldn't be, because I've been around, a long time. I've seen the tricks, but it's just scandalous the way that these companies that are just all about making money trick people into thinking that they're taking an authentic product.
Absolutely. So is it ergothioneine?
Yeah, ergothioneine.
Yeah. So I remember reading you wrote in our emails back and forth that you see it as a vitamin, which is pretty. I like how you put that. But I don't want to get too off topic here. But I'm just curious. Besides lion's mane, is there anything else in the natural world that contains ergothioneine, or is it just lion's mane?
No, all mushrooms have ergothioneine.
Oh, really? Okay.
And it harks back to the common ancestor that animals and fungi share, which is about billion years old. Okay. So the way that fungal organisms and animal organisms regulate their internal cellular environment, there's lots of shared similarities. Plants are much more ancient, so our similarity with plants is a lot less. So in a fungus, ergothioneine, is the main intracellular antioxidant, and glutathione is the secondary antioxidant. And mushrooms are unique. They've got a thing called mycophobic. So in an animal, in us, glutathione is the primary intracellular water-soluble antioxidant, and ergothioneine performs a backup role. So it's like the scenarios are switched between the different phylums. Okay. So every mushroom, every fungus has it. They just have it in different levels. And the highest ergothioneine is in the porcini mushroom, which was a favorite mushroom of Europe and of North America. And early humans, in the fossil record, like 16,000 years ago, our early ancestors in Spain were avid consumers of boletes and agaricus mushrooms, like almost as much as meat when they were available. So any fungus has got it, and humans can't manufacture this molecule. We need to get it from our diet, and fungi is the main source. Soil fungi can deliver a little bit into plants, but it's about 100 times less than what you get from a fungus. And if we don't get enough ergothioneine, it technically doesn't cause a deficiency disease, but you can't, because it's ubiquitous in the diet, because you get some from plants, you can't create a scientific model where someone's absolutely free of it like you can with scurvy. You can put guys on a boat and ship them off into the Pacific, and they'll get scurvy if you don't give them, their veggies or their vitamin C containing fruits. You can't do that with ergothioneine. So to be a vitamin, there's got to be a deficiency disease associated with it. Okay. And I think the deficiency disease associated with a lack of ergothioneine is a shortened lifespan and an increase in disease. So cardiovascular disease increases, macular degeneration increases, you become more frail, and you develop neurocognitive decline without it.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that. The clarification. Oh, I love that. Oh man, there's so many different directions I wanted to go with this too. Okay, so I definitely want to squeeze this question in before we wrap up. But so there's this term, what is it, mycophobic, where people are afraid of mushrooms. Yeah, they're afraid to consume mushrooms. And then I kind of had this question for you as I was preparing for this interview. As herbalists, we never want to say, I don't want to use the word prescribe, but we never want to recommend a one size fits all, like everyone should take this herb for such and such reason.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious from your take, from your background. Do you think everyone, see, I'm going against that. Do you think everyone could benefit from consuming mushrooms or including in their lifestyle? Or do you think that there's people that, like I have a friend, he's actually an herbalist, but he's very mycophobic. He doesn't touch mushrooms, doesn't eat mushrooms, doesn't want to drink the tea ever. But yeah, would you recommend most folks introduce mushrooms in their daily life?
I do, yeah. And the mycophobic thing's real, and I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but there's possibly reasons for that. I think culturally, there's this idea that mushrooms can kill you, but a lot of things in life can kill you. There's only a very small percentage of mushrooms that are poisonous. There's the psychedelic thing, so that's been drilled into us. They're evil because you'll have visions and you'll become an independent thinker and you'll get more creative and you'll want to be more loving and kind, and that gets in the way of how men want to run the world. So
funny enough, my friend will take the psychedelic mushrooms. That's about the only ones.
Yeah, but I have very strong convictions around the fact that humans are designed and are required to eat mushrooms. So, we've got this duality where it's either plants or animals or both. But we really need to introduce the fungal kingdom as a genuine dietary choice rather than it just being a side dish every now and then to make your steak taste better. Because there's chemistry in mushrooms. We've talked about the ergothioneine, but the beta-glucans keep the immune system functioning, in a healthy way. And as a herbalist for 35 years, since I've been doing mushrooms daily, and I take a handful of pills and liquids, and I've been practicing what I preach all these years, my health has improved significantly since introducing medicinal mushrooms, on a regular basis. So I am very firmly of the view that there's some exceptions where people are sensitive or allergic, to certain things, but the average person, and the epidemiology is pretty conclusive on this. Just one serve of mushrooms a week over the course of an 18-year period has been proven to reduce the decline in cognitive function. Just one or two serves of mushrooms a week decreases the incidence of cancers. If you have mushrooms every day, your chance of developing cognitive decline the risk diminishes by 85%. So,
wow.
The epidemiology is really quite solid on this, and I'm on a mission to get people to eat just porcini. Is the signature mushroom of Europe, but in the West, it's button mushrooms or portobello or crimini. It doesn't have to be these fancy exotic things that cost, a weekly wage packet to go and buy. If we ate 2 meals of mushrooms a week, and for people that eat a meat diet, if you replaced your meat with a mushroom in terms of the same weight, it's a revolution in your health. You'll lose weight, you'll have less metabolic disease, you'll live longer, you'll have less cancer. But you have to do it over the course of your whole life.
That's really good to hear. In fact, I was actually going to ask you about the medicinal value of, say, your standard button mushroom. And I kind of just figured, that they all have a lot of the similar constituents going on. And I've actually, made double extracts out of chanterelles, lobster mushrooms. I've done double extracts of like candy caps, and I didn't know what was going on with the chemistry and everything, but I figured it's edible, so there's probably lots of good things going on with those mushrooms.
You're right on the money with that. And candy cap extract is like a delicious drink.
It was good.
It's not a medicine.
It was really good, man. Oh, jeez. Lee, this has been awesome. I definitely want to have you back on the show because I have to hear about this gourmet ape theory. But we'll have to save that for round 2.
Sure, thank you I'd love to come back. Yeah, anytime.
That'd be amazing. Yeah. Well, before we wrap up and get out of here, I always like to ask the guest if there's any closing thoughts. And of course, we brought up real mushrooms quite a bit throughout the show, but feel free to share any particular upcoming events this won't come out for a while, so any upcoming projects or products that you'd like to plug and promote. But
sure.
Yeah.
I think my most common kind of parting comments in a podcast or an interview like this is that we need to be very cautious and aware of what we're purchasing. So be an avid reader of labels. Be an avid reader of quality information like you would get from your show, that you would get from Real Mushrooms, so that you can make informed choices and not get tricked, by the slick marketing campaigns. And make mushrooms a lifestyle. As I was just discussing, it's not just about taking expensive extracts. It's about consuming them as foods on a regular basis, and recognizing that there's nutrients. An ergothioneine is the most compelling argument for the regular consumption of mushrooms. So see mushrooms not as an optional extra, but as a foundational aspect of a healthy modern diet. And then in terms of Real Mushrooms, what's going on there? They're very active on social media, so follow them on Instagram. They've got a YouTube channel. Follow them on Facebook. I do a Facebook Live once a month. You can tune in and ask me questions. And if you're interested in sampling some of the products, if you use my first name, Lee, and it's not case sensitive, you'll get an additional discount of 20% on an order. So Real Mushrooms will give you a good discount the very first time you create an account and buy something. So don't use my discount the first time, use it the second order, so you can enjoy the doubling up of those benefits.
Amazing. Realmushrooms.com. Hey, Lee, Carroll, thank you so much for joining us on the Herbalist Hour. This has been a blast, and we'll see you all in the next episode, all right?
Yeah, thanks, Mason. I've had a great time. Thanks, everyone.
Amazing. Take care. Thanks so much for watching today's episode of the Herbalist Hour. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want more great herbal content, be sure to subscribe to our Herbalist YouTube channel. If you enjoy these Herbalist Hour episodes and you'd like to join us live, you can do so by becoming an Herbalist Schoolhouse member. Learn more at herbalist.com/schoolhouse. And if you want to get your first 30 days for free, use coupon code YouTube30 at checkout. So our Herbalist Schoolhouse members get access to exclusive video classes, monographs, and a lot more herbal community discounts, along with joining these live Herbalist Hour interviews. So one more time, herbalist.com/schoolhouse. Enter coupon code YouTube30 at checkout to get your first 30 days for free. All right, we'll see you in the next episode, and take care.